Texas food tells a story most history books left out. Behind the smoky pits, the sweet cobblers, the finger-licking hot links, and the soul-warming pots of black-eyed peas is a truth that deserves to be told loud and clear. Black Texans did not just eat these foods, they created them. They perfected them. They passed them down through generations of hands that cooked with genius, love, and a stubborn refusal to let their culture be erased. Today, we are counting down 10 foods that Black Texans invented, pioneered, or shaped so completely that Texas cuisine would not exist without them. Stay until the end, because the last one on this list might completely change the way you think about your favorite Texas meal. Number 10, Texas smoked hot links. Long before hot links became the sizzling centerpiece of every backyard cookout in the Lone Star State, Black Texans were building the tradition from scratch. This is not a small footnote in food history. This is the whole story. The hot link, as Texans know it today, traces directly back to Black communities in East Texas, where German and Czech sausage-making traditions collided with West African spice knowledge and Southern soul food creativity. German immigrants brought their sausage casings, their grinding techniques, their smoking expertise. Black Texans brought the heat. They brought the red pepper, the cayenne, the paprika, and the patience to smoke those links low and slow until the casing blistered and the inside ran with savory, deeply spiced meat juice that cooled on the butcher paper beneath. The city of Elgin became the so-called sausage capital of Texas. But what most people gloss over is that Black pit masters were absolutely central to developing the Elgin Hot Links DNA Southside Market, founded in 1882, sold these links to the Black and white community alike. But the style and the seasoning philosophy came from African American culinary tradition, where pork was seasoned aggressively because nothing was wasted and everything had to sing with flavor. A hot link is not a bratwurst. It is not a kielbasa. It is its own thing, born from a specific cultural collision that only happened in Texas, and the Black hands that stirred those spice blends deserve far more credit than they have ever received. Next time you bite into a snapping, smoke-crusted hot link at a Texas cookout, you are tasting 150 years of Black culinary ingenuity hidden inside something that looks simple. Number 9, Juneteenth red soda water. On June 19, 1865, federal soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced that enslaved people were free. 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, Black Texans finally heard the words that changed everything. And when they celebrated, they drank red. The tradition of red foods and red drinks at Juneteenth celebrations is one of the most distinctly Black Texan food customs in American history, and it is rooted in West African cultural memory. In Senegal, in Nigeria, and in the Yoruba tradition, red drinks made from hibiscus flowers called bissap or zobo were celebratory beverages consumed at sacred moments. Enslaved Africans carried that color symbolism across the Atlantic. And in Texas, where watermelons were abundant and later red sodas became commercially accessible, the tradition of the red drink took on a powerful and defiant new meaning. Red soda water, and specifically Big Red, which was born in Waco, Texas in 1937, became the unofficial drink of Juneteenth across Black Texas communities for generations. The pairing of Big Red with barbecue and sweet potato pie at Juneteenth celebrations is not accidental. It is a cultural statement. It is a living link between the rivers of West Africa and the wide, flat Texas prairie, bottled in bright, sweet, unmistakable red and handed from grandmother to grandchild every June. When Juneteenth became a federal holiday in 2021, food writers across the country finally started asking why red drinks matter so deeply to this celebration. Black Texans already knew. They had been answering that question at their family reunions for 150 years before anyone thought to put it in a magazine. Number 8. Peach cobbler. Texas grows more peaches than almost any other southern state, and no one turned that fruit into something transcendent quite like Black Texan home cooks. Peach cobbler as a dessert concept exists in many cultures, but the Texas Black version, with its thick and buttery drop crust, its deeply spiced peach filling, and its unhurried oven time, is a specific art form that belongs to a specific tradition. The word cobbler itself comes from the improvisation of enslaved cooks who had no proper baking equipment and used whatever pans, skillets, and Dutch ovens happened to be available to them. Instead of a proper pastry shell requiring careful technique and precise tools, they cobbled something together with what they had. The name stuck because the result was too delicious to improve upon, and improvement was never really the goal anyway. In Texas, Black cooks elevated cobbler into something closer to revelation. Freestone peaches from Fredericksburg and Stonewall were picked at the peak of summer sweetness and married with cane sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes a splash of vanilla that bloomed in the oven heat and perfumed the whole kitchen. The crust was dropped in rough pieces on top of the fruit, not carefully layered or rolled, because the point was never elegance. The point was that combination of soft, bubbling fruit and crispy, caramelized, buttery dough that could only happen when someone knew exactly what they were doing and refused to rush it. Black church cookbooks across Texas from the early 1900s onward are filled with peach cobbler recipes passed down from grandmothers who learned from their grandmothers. These recipes were never formally published in glossy cookbooks. They lived in handwritten index cards tucked into kitchen drawers, and in the muscle memory of women who made this dessert hundreds of times without measuring a single ingredient. That is mastery. That is the real Texas peach cobbler story, and it starts with Black hands. Number 7, smothered chicken. You will not find smothered chicken on the menu at a fancy steakhouse. You will find it at the kind of restaurant that does not need a sign out front, because everybody in the neighborhood already knows exactly where it is and what time the food is ready. Black Texans built that restaurant. Black Texans invented that dish. Smothered chicken is chicken braised low and slow in a thick, savory gravy built from the pan, drippings, onions, garlic, and sometimes a careful splash of hot sauce, cooked together until the meat falls from the bone without any encouragement whatsoever. The technique is entirely rooted in the African-American tradition of transforming tough, inexpensive cuts of meat into something that tastes like it cost a fortune and took a professional chef to prepare. Enslaved cooks in Texas were given the parts of the chicken that slaveholders did not want: the backs, the necks, the wings, the legs. Through slow cooking and the careful building of gravy from virtually nothing, they turned those humble pieces into meals that the entire household craved. The white plantation owners ate the breast, and yet everybody wanted what came out of the black kitchen at the back of the house. After emancipation, smothered chicken became a cornerstone of Black Texas home. Cooking from Houston's 5th Ward to Dallas's Deep Ellum neighborhood. It was the Sunday dinner that marked the end of the week with something sacred. It was the meal you brought to a neighbor who had lost someone and needed to feel held. It was the dish you made when you needed to feed a crowd with ingredients that cost almost nothing but delivered maximum warmth and comfort. No dish in Texas carries more cultural weight per single bite. Number 6, Texas chili with no beans. Texas chili is a religion in this state, and its passionate followers argue with near violent conviction that real Texas chili contains no beans whatsoever. That is a fact most Texans will agree on. What is far less discussed is that the creation of Texas chili is deeply connected to Black culinary history, and more specifically, to a group of extraordinary women known as the Chili Queens of San Antonio. In the 1800s and early 1900s, the Chili Queens set up open-air cooking stalls in San Antonio's Military Plaza and Alamo Plaza and sold their chili to soldiers, travelers, tourists, and locals who lined up for a bowl long after the sun went down. These women were predominantly Mexican-American, but black women worked alongside them and contributed significantly to the flavor evolution of the dish. The bold use of dried chili pastes, the inclusion of rendered beef fat, the long braising times that develop depth and complexity, all bear the unmistakable influence of African-American cooking traditions that have been blending with Mexican and indigenous foodways for generations across South Texas. The chili that emerged from those San Antonio plazas had no beans because beans were simply not needed. The meat was slow cooked to a tenderness that dissolved on the tongue. The chili paste was layered and complex in a way that took hours to build. The heat was not a shock, but a slow warmth that built through the entire bowl. This was not stew. This was something genuinely new, born from a specific place, and its roots ran deep through black and brown communities that historians have largely ignored until recently. Number 5, chitlins done right. Let us talk about the dish that requires the most skill to cook, the most patience to prepare, and carries the most fascinating history in all of Black Texas food culture. Chitlins, which is to say chitterlings, are slow-cooked pig intestines. And before you judge, understand that dismissing chitlins means dismissing one of the most sophisticated acts of culinary survival and cultural resistance in American history. Enslaved people were given the parts of the pig that slaveholders did not want: the ears, the feet, the snout, the tail, the intestines. Through extraordinary technique, patience, and cultural memory drawn directly from West Africa, where similar organ cooking traditions had existed for centuries, black cooks transformed these discarded pieces into dishes with genuine depth and flavor that the whole plantation eventually wanted access to. In Texas, the chitlin tradition runs especially deep in East Texas, where hog killing season in the fall was a full community event. Black families gathered to process pigs together, and the chitlins required hours of meticulous cleaning, multiple changes of cold water, slow boiling with aromatics like onion and garlic and bay leaf, and a final seasoning that took years of practice to develop. The smell during cooking is powerful and unmistakable. The result, when prepared by someone who truly knows what they are doing, is an incredibly tender, richly flavored dish with a complexity that no shortcut can approximate. Chitlins became a statement food during the Civil Rights era. Eating them was a deliberate act of cultural pride in the face of a society that tried to make Black Americans ashamed of their food. The Chitlin Circuit, the famous network of venues that supported black performers during segregation, was named after this dish for a very specific reason. It was the food that fed the musicians and the audiences and the whole community when the rest of the country refused to. Number 4, barbecue brisket and the Black Pitmaster tradition. Here's the truth that Texas barbecue culture has spent decades soft-pedaling in its own mythology. The technique that made brisket the undisputed king of Texas meat, the low and slow wood smoking method, the reading of the fire, the knowing when to wrap and when to leave alone, the patience that no recipe can fully teach, was developed and perfected by Black pitmasters working in Texas communities long before brisket became a national obsession. Lockhart, Luling, Taylor, the small central Texas towns that now attract barbecue pilgrims driving hours from major cities, had Black pitmasters at the beating heart of their food culture. Tootsie Tominetz, who has been tending the fire pits at Snow's BBQ in Lexington since before most of today's celebrated barbecue personalities were born, is a Black pitmaster whose work finally received the national recognition it always deserved when she was well into her 80s. Her brisket had always been that good. The country simply was not paying attention. Brisket is a notoriously difficult cut of beef. It is the toughest section of the entire animal. It requires 12 to 16 hours of carefully managed smoking at temperatures that must be monitored and adjusted throughout the cook to transform its dense collagen into the silky, yielding, almost buttery texture that makes serious barbecue lovers drive 200 miles for a single plate. That knowledge was never written down in any cookbook. It was passed from black pitmaster to black pitmaster over generations, refined in church parking lots and Juneteenth celebrations in small joints where the sign out front said nothing but the smoke coming from the chimney told you exactly where to go. Number 3, sweet potato pie. The Thanksgiving table in Black Texas households has never required pumpkin pie. There has always been sweet potato pie instead, and that is not a substitution. That is the original, and it arrived at this table long before pumpkin became a holiday cliche. Sweet potatoes came into American Southern cooking from West Africa, where yams had been a staple crop and a culturally significant food for thousands of years before the first slave ship ever crossed the Atlantic. Enslaved cooks brought their knowledge of how to transform root vegetables into rich, spiced, deeply satisfying desserts, combining that West African technique with the sugar and butter and eggs available in Southern plantation kitchens. The result was sweet potato pie, a dessert that predates pumpkin pie in African American culinary tradition and surpasses it, according to anyone who has had a proper slice made by someone who grew up making it. The Black Texas version of sweet potato pie has specific and recognizable characteristics. The filling is silkier than its pumpkin equivalent, with a natural creaminess that comes from roasting rather than boiling the sweet potatoes first, a step that concentrates their sugars and deepens their flavor before a single spice is added. The seasoning leans toward vanilla and warm cinnamon, with a restraint that lets the sweet potato's own complex flavor carry the dessert rather than hiding behind spice. The crust is made entirely from scratch because a proper Black Texas grandmother would not have entertained any other option and would have been visibly offended by the suggestion. Number 2, red beans and rice, Houston style. Texas sits close enough to Louisiana that red beans and rice crossed the border generations ago and became thoroughly naturalized in Black Texas cooking. But the Houston version developed its own unmistakable identity rooted in the Creole and African American food cultures that merged in the historic neighborhoods of 3rd Ward and 5th Ward, where red beans and rice stopped being a Louisiana import and became a Houston institution. Monday was always red beans and rice day. The tradition traces back to when Monday was laundry day, a task that required constant physical attention, leaving no capacity to tend a complicated meal at the same time. Red beans could be left on a low flame, checked occasionally, stirred when you walked past. By evening they were ready, deeply rich and creamy from hours of patient simmering, seasoned with smoked sausage or ham hock that had been in the pot since morning, served over long grain rice, cooked until every single grain was perfectly separate. The Houston version uses andouille or hot link sausage rather than the milder smoked sausage common in New Orleans, because Houston always wanted more heat in everything, and the seasoning is bolder. The trinity of onion, celery, and bell pepper goes into the pot with more intention. A bottle of hot sauce sits permanently on the table, never put away between meals because everybody in the household already knows it will be needed again before the day is over. This is the dish that Houston's Black community has fed its children, its elders, its neighbors, and its visitors for well over a century. It is the dish that costs almost nothing to make and delivers more comfort per spoonful than restaurant food that costs 50 times as much. It is living proof that true genius in the kitchen has never required expensive ingredients. It only requires knowing what you are doing and caring about the people you are feeding. Number 1, East Texas barbecue sauce. If you have eaten barbecue in East Texas, you know immediately and without any doubt that the sauce is different from anything you find in the rest of the state. It is sweeter and darker and thicker than the thin, acidic sauces of Central Texas. It clings to the meat with purpose rather than running off onto the paper below. It caramelizes over the fire into a lacquered, deeply complex coating that makes every other sauce you have ever tried seem like it was missing something essential. This is the East Texas barbecue sauce tradition, and it is a Black invention built over generations in communities that food writers are only now beginning to acknowledge. Black communities in East Texas, concentrated in cities like Tyler, Beaumont, Lufkin, and Marshall, developed their barbecue sauce tradition from a combination of West African sweetness preferences carried in cultural memory, Southern molasses and sorghum traditions built during and after slavery, and the tomato-based sauces that became available commercially in the early 20th century. The essential ingredients were always tomato, brown sugar, or molasses for body and depth, apple cider vinegar to cut through and balance the sweetness, cracked black pepper for heat, and always at least one secret ingredient that every pitmaster refused to name and took extraordinary measures to protect. This sauce was never poured cold from a bottle onto finished meat. It was always applied hot and by hand, brushed onto brisket or ribs in the final stage of the cook, so it could reduce on the surface and caramelize and bond completely with the bark. The timing of that application was itself an art form that could not be rushed or approximated. Apply the sauce too early and the sugar burns bitter before the meat is done. Too late and it never properly fuses. The precise moment came only from experience accumulated over years of cooking for communities that would immediately know the difference. Church fundraisers across East Texas were financed by this sauce for generations. Black pitmasters sold plates out of parking lots and backyards and tiny storefronts with no signs, building community wealth one plate at a time, supporting families and congregations on the strength of something they mixed by feel and applied by instinct. The sauce traveled with Black Texans who moved to Houston and Dallas during the Great Migration, carrying the flavor of East Texas into big city kitchens where it continued to evolve. Today, East Texas barbecue sauce is finally receiving the recognition it deserves from food writers who are only now catching up to what Black Texans have understood for more than a century. The sweetness is not an accident of Southern taste. It is a deliberate philosophy. It is a connection to Africa, to the American South, and to a community that built something extraordinary and refused to let it disappear without credit. 10 foods, 10 stories, one undeniable truth. Black Texans did not just survive on this soil. They fed it. They built its flavor from the ground up, with spices carried in memory across the Atlantic Ocean, with techniques refined in kitchens where they had no legal rights but absolute culinary mastery, and with a generosity that kept feeding everyone around them even when those people refused to say thank you or give credit. The next time you sit down to a plate of smoked brisket, or a bowl of red beans over rice, or a slice of sweet potato pie, take a moment and remember whose hands built that tradition. Say the names. Tell the stories. Share this video so the history travels the way the recipes always did, from person to person, with love and with intention. Subscribe so you never miss another story that deserves to be told, because there are so many more.